After the recent flops of the Marvels and Madam Web, there are some people out there on the blogosphere, websphere, interwebs, whatever you want to call it these days, that are a little bit concerned that men will no longer be inundated with stupid girl boss superhero fantasy flicks or whatever. And I say, this is probably a good thing. We know there was recently a Disney exec that came out and said, Bob Iger is looking to go back to like male-led movies and male-led projects and all that kind of stuff, which I think is probably a smart move. Does that mean that you can't have female-led superhero movies? Well, I know you probably can, but you actually have to have good writers, because in modern times, I don't know if you've noticed this, but women are not allowed to fail in movies. They can never be proven wrong. They're never allowed to have struggles along their hero's journey, which makes the story quite boring and lame and hard to latch onto, and certainly removes any of the stakes and other things that really draw you into a film or narrative. This is what I'm talking about. It's a recent article from the Mary Sue called "Women Shouldn't Have to Pay for Studios Dropping the Ball on Female-Led Superhero Films." And I say, fuck that. Men shouldn't have to pay for studios trying to make the MCU a thing that's happening. And they've been trying to do this for a very, very long time. And I have some points to make on this one, because this particular writer on this particular article likes to present a lot of things without any context whatsoever to prove her point. But I think I'm going to disprove this one quite well, and even throw in a couple of anecdotes in there to prove to you that men and women feel differently about different genres of entertainment and stuff like that. First off, she starts out, last year, despite critical reviews leaning positive, the Marvels had too many factors working against it and flopped at the box office. The response was nothing short of gross and bizarre, as social media users and media outlets could barely contain their glee at the disappointing box office outcome. The film and director Nia DaCosta's achievements were overlooked and minimized, while the movie's shortcomings were sensationalized. And I love the little part where it says leaning positive. Well, there's been 33 MCU movies out there at this point in time, and all of them have had professional reviews assigned to them from the Tomatometer? Whatever the Rotten Tomato thing is. You get the Rotten score, maybe it's okay, and then you get the one with the little green thing that says this thing is certified fresh or whatever. This is the third lowest reviewed MCU movie in history. Thor: Love and Thunder is reviewed more positively than the Marvels. I would say the shortcomings were not sensationalized. It obviously had many shortcomings, because the vast majority of professional reviewers out there are Disney shills. They wanted to give it a positive score, but they also wanted to keep their reputations intact and knew they couldn't really just flat out lie to people anymore. So they had to be a little bit honest about the film and actually admit it wasn't very good. This thing is reviewed more poorly than Thor: The Dark World, an atrocious movie. Reviewed worse than Iron Man 3, another really, really bad movie. Let's not act like The Marvels is just this amazing movie that no one really got and just didn't understand. It was just reviewed off the charts. This ain't fucking Citizen Kane, one of the greatest movies of all time, if you know what I mean, but did bomb at the box office. This thing bombed for a lot of reasons, one of which is they spent $300 million on remaking Freaky Friday and throwing superheroes in it. What a stupid concept for a movie. The other thing we do have to take into the account, people were also bait and switched on Captain Marvel. We were told, you have to watch this movie to understand Endgame. That was a fucking lie, and you made us spend $1 billion on a pretty goddamn mid movie with a not very interesting superhero played by a pretty wooden actress. People were not happy about that. Who are the other stars in this movie? It's Miss Marvel, the lowest viewed MCU show in Disney history. It's also a sequel to fucking Secret Invasion, something else no one liked. This thing was set up to bomb from the very beginning. It's certainly not our fault as men, as people that like superhero movies. If they delivered a good movie, I think people probably would have supported it. It was just obvious from the get-go that that was not what was actually happening here. Next up, she states, when the Marvels opened to $47 million, it was deemed an immense failure. But when Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was projected to open to $30 to $40 million, it was deemed a success. It became clear that the sexist trolls were hoping for the Marvels' failure to use it as an excuse to write off female-led superhero movies. Now that Madam Web is struggling to stay afloat at the box office amid terrible critical reviews, the same phenomenon is starting to happen. Once again, leaving out a lot of context to that opening weekend. Yes, the Marvels opened to $47 million domestically, but worldwide, it opened up to less than $100 million. While Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom didn't have quite the domestic opening, it absolutely blew it away. And I think it actually doubled the numbers of the Marvels worldwide. And it actually eclipsed the entire Marvel's box office lifetime in 2 weeks' time. Now, was Aquaman the Lost Kingdom a huge success considering the first movie made $1 billion? I would say that Warner Brothers Discovery would disagree with that. But if you look at all the DCE movies leading up to Aquaman the Lost Kingdom, it did better than all of them. So in that respect, you could say it kind of was a success for Warner Brothers Discovery. Whereas in the case of the Marvels, it has the lowest box office return in the history of the MCU. I've already mentioned that's 33 movies and I think 18 years. It was 2008 when the MCU kicked off, and it actually performed worse than The Incredible Hulk by Ed Norton. How many people even remember Ed Norton was the Incredible Hulk in the first movie at this point? Probably not many out there, and it was an enormous failure. It had the biggest second-week drop-off in the history of movies. You know what didn't eclipse the drop-off from the Marvels? Madam Web. We do need to look at these things with some context and realize that while, yes, at the time, they might have performed almost equally domestically, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom absolutely kicked the Marvel's ass. It was something that the MCU under Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios, and Disney had never seen before. An enormous flop. They lost hundreds of millions of dollars with the Marvels. Guess who didn't lose hundreds of millions of dollars? Because the budget on Aquaman, despite a movie being under fucking water, and the Marvels, being in space, which feels like you just need a fucking green screen or whatever, it didn't have nearly as big of a budget. So yes, the Marvels opening was absolutely atrocious. It was laughable. They barely squeaked by the total Captain Marvel opening weekend worldwide, like during the entire lifetime of the movie. So let's stop pretending that the Marvels wasn't the flop that we know it is. And let's stop pretending that Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is anywhere close to the enormous flop that the Marvels is. Now, if you want to talk about The Flash, we can have that conversation, because The Flash absolutely bombed. Next up, the author decides to start equating things that don't even belong together. Even suggesting that women can't carry the box office in any area is laughable. Did the industry already forget that women made Barbie the #1 film of 2023? A staggering 66.2% of Barbie's audience was female. Additionally, in 2019, a study found that young women aged 15 to 24 went to the theater more frequently than men of the same age group, and even suggested that movies should start catering more to this demographic. Meanwhile, female representation in Madam Web's audience was not bad. Roughly 46% of ticket buyers for the film identified as female. So expecting the Marvels to be a success because the Barbie movie did well is like, I don't know, expecting The Flash to blow up because Top Gun Maverick did well. They're not really the same thing. Like, you're comparing apples to oranges. You're not even in the same sport at this point. Barbie, and I would bet money on this, and I'm not like a toy historian or a toy expert, but I would confidently bet a substantial amount of money that Barbie is probably the most bought toy in the history of America by females. Like, in the history of the entire country, it is synonymous with females. This is something that generations and generations and generations of women grew up with. And it's really not even America. You go to the Philippine store, guess what? Barbies all over the place. Guess who's buying them? Girls. So girls grew up with Barbie. This is something that was very important to them. Guess what they didn't grow up with? Captain Marvel. Guess what they didn't grow up with? Madam Web and Spider-Man. Sure, the Spider-Man cartoon was there, and I'm certain that a portion of the audience for that Spider-Man cartoon were female, and they probably know about Madam Web and all that stuff. But for the most part, Spider-Man and Captain Marvel aren't nearly as important to females, basically worldwide, as Barbie is. Shockingly, Barbie blew up with a female audience. And I know, like, there's like this weird misconception that dudes are just like daydreaming about sex all day. Let me let you in on something. Sure, we daydream about sex because sex is amazing. But you know what else we daydream about? Going on a quest. I already know who I would be. I would be the archer. Guess who would be the swordsman? The swordsman would be Perch. Aaron Sparrow would be the guy with the axe. Yule Carter would be the wizard. Merry and Pippin would be Eric and Doc. And I think Josh would make the best friend that never gives up. I really think about this stuff, and guys really think about this stuff because I've had conversations with my friends and we've talked about the quests that we would like to go on to. And it doesn't just end with going on a magical quest with awesome weapons and all that kind of stuff and fighting villains. We daydream about being superheroes. We literally do from the time we're kids all the way up through adulthood. I'm 45 years old and I still think about this shit. This stuff is actually ingrained into us. And that's why you see audiences for the Captain Marvel movie that made $1 billion. That wasn't 66% female. It was 61% male. The Marvels movie that bombed, a majority of the audience was male. Madam Web bombed, a majority of the audience was male, because this is the shit that actually interests us. This is the stuff that we come to the dance for. And it's far more appealing to a male audience than a female audience. Shockingly, girls go out and support girl stuff, and guys go out and support guy stuff, even if it's led by a girl. It just so happens Madam Web and the Marvels both suck. And so did Captain Marvel, but to a lesser degree. But we were bait and switch because of Endgame, and we thought we needed to see the movie. Stop comparing Barbie to fucking superhero movies. Girls don't grow up with superheroes the way that boys do. And boys don't grow up with Barbie the way that girls do. That's just the way it is. Next up, she states, those trying to say that female-led superhero films don't work or that women aren't showing up for these movies seem to be missing the studio's role in these failures. The Marvels was a good movie that both male and female audiences gave stellar reviews to. However, due to the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes that Disney refused to bring to an end, the film took a huge hit regarding promotion and advertising. The fact that the studio still chose to release it without being able to capitalize on its star power for promotion was a poor choice, especially since it was already taking a hit from superhero and franchise fatigue. So yeah, we need to make some excuses for why the Marvels bombed, besides the fact that it wasn't a very good movie that nobody wanted to see, that people were still holding a grudge against because they were bait and switched on the first Captain Marvel movie. But it's because of the actor strikes, and truly, Disney should have just acquiesced to all the demands early so that they could get Brie Larson and Iman Vellani out on the PR circuit so they could sell the movie. That's the reason that it only made $200 million worldwide versus the $1.1 billion Captain Marvel did. Yes, the lack of Brie Larson's star power on The Late Show with whoever's doing that right now led to a $900 million worldwide decrease. Brie Larson doesn't really have any star power. Iman Vellani, as nice as she is, and she seems adorable and all that kind of stuff, even less star power. There was no star power associated with the show. And let's not forget, this is a direct sequel to a movie that was very mid, that people were screwed over on. It's also a sequel to the WandaVision show with Photon that no one really cared about those parts of the show. It's a sequel to the Miss Marvel show that nobody watched. It's also a sequel to Secret Invasion and all this stuff. And nobody liked any of that stuff. It was a sequel to 5 things nobody wanted to ever revisit again. Shockingly, it didn't do well in the long run. If Brie Larson was able to make it on the Jimmy Kimmel show or whatever it is that they do these days, and Iman Vellani was able to go out and do an interview on Nickelodeon, how much more does this movie do? $5 million more? Like, what's the big difference? This thing failed because it was a stupid idea. Let's not forget, yeah, it's the studio's fault because somebody at Disney greenlit fucking Freaky Friday with girls as superpowers in a Girlboss movie. It was a stupid idea. They sunk $300 million into something that was never going to make money to begin with. This should have been an ABC after-school special or something like that, because that's the quality of story that you were getting in this. You will notice that men actually supported it. If women actually supported this movie like they did Barbie, it would have been an enormous financial success. It would have made money, and we would be getting more of Captain Marvel and the Marvels and all that kind of shit. We would be getting more of Madam Web if women actually supported this shit. But they don't. They don't like the stuff either because it's poorly made, it's redundant, it's fucking cliche, and it's really boring at this point. Her final statement, releasing female-led superhero films that were poorly received or box office disappointments isn't an excuse to simply stop making these films. It's a sign that studios need to keep trying until they get it right. Women aren't the problem. The numbers already show that women will show up if a film about them is genuine and given the same opportunities to succeed as any other movie. So maybe it's time for the studios to answer for Madam Web's and the Marvel shortcomings instead of blaming women. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to blame hiring women writers on superhero shows and movies as one of the reasons all this shit never works. And I forgot the thing that she said in the very first paragraph. Let's not diminish the accomplishments of Nia DaCosta, the director of the Marvels. What's the accomplishment? Literally, what's the accomplishment? She lost more money on an MCU movie than any director in history? Not exactly an accolade. It's not something to get excited about. And I don't really blame the female audience. I don't blame the male audience. I do blame them bringing in a bunch of people that don't know how to write superheroes. The exact same thing is happening, in comic books right now. Guess what I can tell you as a comic book fan and someone that has a comic book YouTube channel when it comes to Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel and comic book sales. They don't really make money on any of the floppies because the characters aren't popular. Shockingly, when 2/3 of your roster of your superhero team-up movie are characters no one cares about, it didn't make any money. And guess what? Photon's even less popular. Now, I do think that Monica Rambeau should have been a big deal. Monica Rambeau probably should have been Captain Marvel, but Kelly Sue DeConnick and the brain trust at Marvel Comics didn't let that happen. Women are the problem, and men shouldn't have to suffer with all this bullshit. We should be getting awesome superhero films. We had the golden age of superhero movies, and it only lasted like 6 or 7 years before they brought in women and burned the whole fucking thing down with their terrible writing and their terrible takes. Guess what? No one wants to see a hero that never loses. No one wants to see a hero that never struggles. No one wants to see a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu or whatever the fuck you want to call them. They're boring and they're so played out at this point, it's not even funny. And I've got more opinions on this kind of stuff, but I don't have enough time to give it to you here. But if you go to the Patreon, there's a link in the video description. Way more conversations about comic books, comic book movies, basically anything surrounding geek culture we will hit with my good friends like Doc, Aaron Sparrow, Jim from Weird Science on some awesome podcasts there. If you like the long form content, the Patreon is the place to be. And I know you got extra money because you didn't see the Marvels or Madam Web either because you were smart like me.